everybody, and welcome to another E5 podcast. I am your host, Paul Meenan, and I'm flying solo for this one. We've got another guest in, and this guest is a very good friend of mine. And for those who have listened to more than one E5 podcast, you'll remember me regaling you with stories of the wars against the concrete farmers, the civil engineers, the hole diggers, and various other inter-trade and interdisciplinary debates that I've had throughout my career. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd bring someone on who's been part of my career, and we've been through the wars together. It's fun enough how we became friends. So welcome to the E5 podcast, Colin.
Thank you, Paul. Glad to be here. And yeah, I am one of those certified hole diggers. That is me. Yeah. So
you are the king of the hole digging, concrete farming community.
This is me. We tried to get a bit of steel in there as well, if we can. And then
a bit of steel and glass goes a long way to making sure the job's finished.
So it makes it look like we know what we're doing.
So it's fair to say, Colin, that our backgrounds are very much the commercial, industrial, build, fit out, refurbishment, regeneration, demolition. That's what me and you have worked on over the years, including a number of specialist stuff. I've been your pipes and wires guy, and you've been my hole digger, labour, resourcer, slab maker for my panels, etc., sealer of my switch rooms, and all the rest of it. So just tell us a little bit about your background, your experience, your role, and stuff. You don't have to tell us who you work for or anything like that, but just tell us a little bit about.
So I actually came into the industry in a guise that is even more despised than the hole diggers and the pipes and wire engineers and our rivalry. I came in as a quantity surveyor, money man, bean counter. I was
money counter. Oh, dear.
Yeah, I was looking after the pennies, and I did that for about 5 years, and that was enough. I won't go into detail, but that was enough. So I made the switch, and I became a sub-agent with a small company that was working on rail refurbishment projects, and kind of came up through there. So yeah, sub-agent with them. After a couple of years, they trusted me with a site, made me the agent of the site, and that was some ventilation work on the underground as well. And onwards and upwards from there, really. The jobs got bigger, the budgets got bigger, the problems got bigger, and our relationships with our fellow disciplines became bigger. So I started to understand more and more about what I needed to do to support the pipes and the wires, and vice versa.
Yeah, and it's fair to say. So your background, you've worked on rail, transportation, airports. You've worked on a whole range of. I've done office fit out, Excel Arena, railway station depots, stations, all sorts of shenanigans. I've done with domestic time as well. It's always interesting. So you started off, so that was kind of like, I wouldn't say it's equivalent of what some people frown upon as short course, but that would actually be a strength in the eyes of a lot of people, because coming in as a quantity surveyor, which is, you're right, it's a bean counter. It's someone who looks at the quantities of materials and time and labour and costs, and make sure that that's managed and tracked and optimised. So that actually wasn't a bad grounding, but it's like with anything. If you join the electrical industry, if you work in McDonald's, you decide to become a spark, you can't become one in 5 days, 15 days, 25 days. It's the application of time, the gathering of knowledge, and your own conscious understanding of what you do know and what you don't know. And then eventually you get to the point, after many years of applying that, you become aware of what you're good at, what you're competent at, and what you're not. And I think it's fair to say, when I left the electrical contracting world, I left it because I was being audited and I was failing on certain things and I didn't understand. So I went and did a bit of auditing, and rather than going back into the electrical world, because I'd kind of done that role, it was more, why don't I go and work with the civils boys? And I got asked, I think I've told this story before, I got asked to attend a meeting on a job where things weren't going correctly, and then I got offered to join that company. I joined the company, and that was actually where I met you. And it's fair to say, the first time you met, we did clash.
I suspect we did, yes. Yeah.
We did clash.
Just going back to your point, because you made a really good point about bringing in the skills from the quantity surveying, but also taking a bit of time to learn the strengths. I mean, I actually took a step back in my career, if you like, because I was a quantity surveyor. So I started out, junior assistant, made my way up to quantity surveyor. But then to make that transition across, which was very difficult, by the way, just to digress very, very quickly, I'll just tell a little vignette. I made the decision kind of consciously over the sort of 3 to 6 month period that QSing wasn't for me, and that's no disrespect to the profession. I just found it wasn't for me. It was the further you go up that career path, the further you get from sites, and I wanted to be more out on the sites and running the sites. So I made that decision over the course of time, and it was looking back now, you can laugh. It was a bit frustrating at the time because I'd submit my CV for a assistant site manager job or a site sub agent role or whatever it might be, and it became something that I was able to almost recite without thinking because it happened so often. I'd get a phone call from the agency and they'd say, "Oh, we've got your CV, but we think you've submitted it for the wrong job." No. "Oh yeah, but you submitted it for the assistant site manager job." Yes. "Yeah, but you're a QS and you've got 5 years experience." Yes. "Well, what?" And then you'd have to go through the whole rigmarole as to why you were doing what you were doing, and it became something I was able to, like I say, recite verbatim because I'd done it so much.
You were building up and serving your time, which is really important. Because first time I met you, you were like the cave dweller. So you were like we had this site set up with, it was triple decked cabins. It was triple decked. It was a small city. It was the most complex, compact, large set out. There was huge steel members holding all this up, but it was a huge triple decked compound of site offices with all the civils and everybody else in it. And
just to touch on that, as a bit of the reasoning behind it, because I unfortunately did inherit the shame of first erecting and installing that compound, and thus having to deal with its many machinations throughout the entire time that we were there. And of course, again, no criticism to anyone because this happens and it always happens, and it's just something that we kind of manage. The scale of the accommodation was woefully inadequate in terms of the job as it ended up being, because
you mean the fact that we had 24 cabins for over at one point 1,000 men on site.
It was no real canteen
inadequate
facility, a couple of microwaves and a Formica table. So the third story was an add-on after the first 2 stories were deemed to be adequate, and it didn't just grow up, it grew, like you say, Paul, kind of on the horizontal plane as well. So it became like an intertwining labyrinth of cabins and walkways. And I if I remember, I think I had to, from my office, I think I had to come out, go back in, come out, and then go back into your office. It was a crazy intertwining.
Yeah, I got this wonderful little mezzanine office, didn't I? It was like this thing that poked out, and it was the best view because you got the whole site. But it was, people had to go in and out to get in, which was good because if it was raining, we knew people wouldn't bother coming in to see us, so we had a bit of peace and quiet to crack on.
Well, again, I think it was. So just add on. I think it was partly because of why we're talking about what we are talking about. When we set up those offices and plan those offices, I imagine the resource or the facility that we put in for the electrical or the M&E as it should be was probably one desk and one filing cabinet in the corner to conceive that it would be a army of people, 6 or 7 managers and an army on site just didn't. Well,
let's put that into that context. So when that job was started, you're right, there was one M&E manager, mechanical and electrical as the phrase, but it's now called MEP. One M&E manager who was juggling all the requests from a small army of agents, sub-agents, construction managers, finishing foremen, site supervisors and subcontractors. He had to deal with everything, and it was physically impossible. And the reason I came onto that job was the director was going, "Oh, I don't know what's going wrong," and I'm sitting in this office going, "Well, I can tell you easily what's going wrong. It's your behaviours and your attitudes which is wrong." And I think with anyone in any trade, when you sometimes visualise what a job is going to be, the end product hopefully isn't too far away from the vision, but sometimes it can be far. I mean, I never considered that at the start of that job there was one M&E manager. I got brought in and I knew straight away I was living on the job and I needed a small army. So we ended up getting a small army of about, I think it was about 8 or 10 guys to hold the hands of the subcontractors. They were failing, and rather than kick them, it was literally hold hands, bring them along on this journey to get the job done. And the end job was, I think it's fair to say, and we can say it now because it's been well over 10 years since that job. I was pretty much redesigning that job as an agent would say, well, that wall needs to move because the designer didn't consider this. And the impact on me was always huge. So every day we'd have daily meetings, and there would be this bow wave of the impact from the change in the wall movement, the civils, the structures, the glazing, the finishes is always going to kick the fire, electrical, mechanical systems. So I was on that job from start to when the actual railway station opened. Yeah, no, that was from the day I started, right, which was when the first piece of Unistruct went on a wall, to the day the station opened was 18 weeks. And in 18 weeks, I spent £16.2 million.
I just assumed you'd been there at least like 18 months.
Oh, no. So I was there. I was there for only that period of time. And in that 16, I mean, the first 3 or 4 weeks, I'd spent virtually nothing. But it was then I ramped up. I was living on that job day and night. As you were aware, we had a hotel booked across the room for me, which I stayed in for 2 nights of a hotel booking.
That does make a lot of sense now, because if I start, because I was there for 2.5 years, which is why I probably just thought you were there longer. But of course, when I start to break that down, there was a period, because that job was originally conceived as being a lot bigger than it ended up, even though it ended up fairly big and very costly. It was even conceived as even more bigger. And I was on site for a long time, waiting for design, doing survey work to inform the design, but not really much else. I mean, we sat around for nearly a year, not really doing anything. And then when it became apparent that the larger scale project wasn't going to be able to happen, there was a bit of a scrabbling around with regard to what can we do, because we have to do something now. Everyone's here and we've already spent all this money, so let's put something in place. And you're right, so we were instructed to do, I think at the time it was probably a £9 million refurb. Ended up being about 20, of course, as these things do. And that was only for 9 months, from the day we got that instruction to completing and opening the station was at 9 months. So
just on that, Colin, believe it or not, because I actually have I don't know if I ever shared it with you, I've actually got a presentation of the project that we worked on with all the facts and figures. So the total cost of that project was 65 million in total, which kind of blew me away that I spent 16 in so little time. But it's an amazing project because I've still got all the data, all the photos, all the construction shots, before and afters. I've got some amazing data. In fact, if anyone wants to see it, I think I put it on my LinkedIn profile under the job that I had. It's attached, on LinkedIn. Yes. I believe you can attach PDFs. So I attached the PowerPoint under the job that I had. This was at Morgan Est at the time, which is now Morgan Sindall. It's fair to say that was where we started working. Now, just on that, okay, so you've gone into construction management, you've done you've worked with civil engineers, you've done all the planning, you've done all the arranging, and it's fair to say that one of the reasons why me and you became good friends was because you were, as I'll go back to what I said earlier on, you were like the troll in the basement, because you were the go-to guy for everything. Anything needed doing, there was a finishing foreman, and then there was Colin, and that was it. And then it became on the M&E, go to Paul, and that was it. And it was like we were the people that were running around doing planning and overseeing it and making sure everything happened. And it was absolutely, and we that's how we got on and bonded and realized that working together is far easier than working apart and trying to communicate better and all the rest of it. But moving on from that job, this is a podcast for the electrical industry, not the civil engineering, although there's fascinating tales to be told, because there's a lot of contractors listening to this will be going, how do I get a job working for a bigger contractor? So if I want to move out of domestic, how do I go about working on one of those larger projects where I've got a design given to me and all the rest of it? Do you have any advice or words for them?
I think I do, because what I found, certainly in the sector that we work in, the sort of heavy infrastructure and heavy transportation sectors, is that there tends to be a reliance on the civil engineer fraternity for project management. A lot of guys that come out of the ICE, it always perplexed me, because they will sit in university lectures and deal with, how a grain of clay performs in friction against, a pile, or some crazy formula that's about this long and only like a handful of people can actually understand. Absolutely battle and wrestle with it to get their M-Eng or C-Eng or whatever qualification they're going on, and then go into the workplace and just project manage and not use or deal with any of that stuff. So what I tend to find is we put a lot of people in charge of jobs at quite senior levels who won't have an electrical background, they won't have a mechanical background, they won't necessarily have had much experience either. So I think what a contractor really needs to bring, certainly from my experience, is a very good level of confidence that they can be trusted to deliver and provide good sound knowledge to their client, because their client won't necessarily have that ingrained within their organization. It's still quite niche, I think. I think it's getting to be not as niche, but I think it's still quite niche, the electrical world and the mechanical world. And as buildings get more complicated, more intelligent, it's going to become more and more important. So definitely, in that respect, it's been able to be very, very trustworthy and impart knowledge and advice. Don't be frightened to suggest that a design, perhaps in one extreme isn't right, or at the very least could do with some improvement. Bring that to the table and share your expertise, basically.
I think that's right. Now, and again, so I'm going to give another word of advice, because you're absolutely right there. You should never be afraid to go in anywhere. If you've been asked to go somewhere and contribute, don't be afraid to contribute. I have sat in meetings, which is really weird because my dad used to do this, and I've ended up doing the exact same. I'd sit in a meeting with a designer and go, well, how'd you build that? How'd you build that? Well, this man, Colin, wants to take that wall down. So you've just said you're going to fix to it. How are you going to fix to it when you need to take it down because that wall's only up for 6 months? Oh, right. Well, that means another layer of temporary works, or the cable needs to be diverted again, and there needs to be ducts. And how have you considered ducts? Because he's just told you he's pouring a big slab and there's no ducts in it. And you end up with your practical sense of. I've always gone into every meeting, and I've always had the very simple mindset is every meeting you go into, if you're talking about a build or a project, how am I in my head going to either manage it, engineer it, or build it on site? Because you could find yourself in one of those roles. And if I haven't got enough information on the drawing, then I can't build it. If I don't have enough information on a drawing or a pack of drawings or enough drawings, then I can't engineer it. If I don't have enough information as to what the intent is, you're going to ask me for a Ferrari and I'm going to give you a Kia.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And there are multiple levels above the electrician, the electrical contractor that can fail. And if you're being asked to go in and support, don't be afraid to support, but make sure, and there's no shame in saying this, make sure if you're asked, get paid for your time. Get paid for your time without a doubt.
No shame in that.
There's always, helping out and giving a bit of advice, but once you go past more than half a day, you need to say, right, I want to be paid for this. I can help you and I can do this, even if it's as a consultant or whatever, because for anyone who wants to go and play with the big boys, it's not hard. All you got to do is basically just get in touch with the Balfours, the Carillions, etc., and you just email them and ask to be put on their SME supply chain, small to medium enterprise supply chain, as a supplier, as a contractor. They will ask you if you've got CHAS accreditations, which is generic health and safety box tick exercise. They'll ask you if you're NIC or NAPIT or whatever, which means nothing to the civil engineering fraternity. Is it fair to say? Does the NIC or anything?
I'd imagine, yeah. I mean, again, you're probably gonna be either having to deal with business development managers or supply chain managers or procurement managers who haven't got some of them won't even have a background in construction, might have a background in business, won't necessarily have a background in construction, and they might be your doorway into the company. So don't be frightened to, like you say, sell yourself, because like you say, Paul, some of these things there'll be acronyms and they won't understand them.
Well, also these business development managers, as we use the term, they are effective. They're not salesmen, but they're the people that go out, say hello, do the engagement, negotiation, and they're the ones that try and win the work for the business to keep the staff employed. So they're generally reasonably well paid, and generally good talkers, I suppose. But they're also the first to get sacked if there's no work, because the books must be full for a major contractor. Major contractors, if let's say if I went to work as a business development manager for Balfour Beatty tomorrow, I have no doubt they would turn around to me and say, you need to bring in £1 million worth of work every 3 months.
Every quarter, yeah.
Every quarter of mechanical and electrical work. And if you don't do it, then you're gone. Simple as that. We'll allow you one slip up and then you're gone, because we're paying your salary, and this is how their costs work out. But so that's a bit of advice for anyone who wants to go into it. It's definitely a world worth exploring. If you are going to go into the civil engineering world, be prepared to do a lot of teaching and advising, because it's fair to say, when I walked into the world of civil engineering, there was a lot of rows. There was a lot of fighting. I will give a quick story of one where we were at a certain station where somebody was using a digger to dig up the yard, which was great. And digging up the yard, everybody's happy, playing with their toys. But in the bucket of the digger was these copper rods, which were attached to an 800 kVA transformer, and obviously, as you can imagine, that's an energized system. So I think it's fair to say, my first year working with civil engineers, there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of arguing, and the reason being is like with anything in life, if you don't know and that I had to share my knowledge in a way that they understood it, and like eat, sleep, repeat, to the point where, I mean, it's fair to say that I would teach guys about earthing, isolation, electricity at work rigs, basic, but not all of it, but enough for you guys to realize, if you're working on an electrical system and I'm not on that job, do you have a safe system of work? Are you doing the earthing correctly, and stuff like that? I found helped me bond with a lot of the agents and a lot of the civils guys. In that company. It was cool.
I think if I could just add to that, I think awareness of facilities and installations on site and running the site is getting better, because of course the health and safety implications of not understanding those can be catastrophic.
And the union as well.
And the union. Where I think an electrical tractor is going to have to put a lot of effort is depending on how. See, that's the problem. Sometimes they're not brought in till it's too late, because it's still seen in some circles as a kind of fit out back end operation, which isn't really the best way to manage. Now, where you're going to maybe stick up for yourself is during the build, when it becomes apparent that something you're installing doesn't fit, or something's been built out of sequence, so you can't get your bit of kit to the room, or you can't achieve your bending radius. These sorts of things, which are not necessarily safety driven, but more design and practicality driven. You're going to have to make yourself heard, maybe come up with some good solutions, and probably have those discussions, because not everyone will understand about the bending radius of a cable, or the centres of the unistrut having to be such and such that they can't build that wall on that grid line or whatever it might be. So I think that's another. You've hit a nail. Focus on.
You've hit one nail on the head as well, because I always encourage people, don't allow your career to be limited. If you're an electrician listening to this, or a contractor, and you want to work. I worked my way up from and through contracting into civil engineering world, and I found, you're right, too many contractors bring the M&E as this fit out thing at the arse end of the job. The one thing I found as the M&E manager throughout the life of the job, the minute we bought that project in, I was working on tenders. And we would sit for weeks at a time. I worked on one tender where I spent 4 months in an office just tendering it, and every discipline engineer or manager would sit and understand every nuance of the job that we were tendering. And we would do presentations to each other. And I remember on one of the presentations, the civils guy sat there and he went, and we're going to build this corridor first, and then we're going to do the walls, and then we're going to put the slab on top. And that's what it's about. It's about almost a blockwork building, isn't it? It's sectioning, breaking a job into sections.
Yeah.
How do we build it, and how do we reduce the amount of disruption? And I remember throughout all of it, I was sitting there mortified, going, "Where'd you get the power in? How'd you get the transformer in? I can't get my cable." And the guy said, "Oh, I've put you a services duct." And I looked at this services duct, and it went down 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. And I had to say to guys, "Oh, excuse me, my cables don't bend 90 degrees. What do you mean?" "Well, they're 300 mil 4 cores. They're not going to give like that when you're physically installing them. They're just going to kind of swoop and sway and swoop and curve. You're not going to get a 90-degree bend on that, not without great, and it will damage the cable." And it was like a 150-meter run. So luckily, the guys went, "Oh yeah, you're right." And we actually went through the bending radius of cables and debated it all. And we actually redesigned bigger chambers at different dimensions so that the ducts were slightly separate, but the ducts gave us a successful route, and we still added access chambers, but they didn't follow purely the route of the corridor. So the ducts were built so that the walls could be built above them, and it made the installations easier. The value in that means far less ball ache for the poor blokes doing the cable pulling. But how do you measure the successes of what you do when you're being proactive is very difficult.
It's very difficult, but at the same time, it's so important. I think you've really raised a good point there, because, and then this might be another opportunity for that aspiring electrical contractor to make a bit of an impression. You know, the world. I mean, I did some kind of bidding during my tenure, and the pressures with the time is astronomical, because you're literally, I mean, on these larger scale projects, going back a little bit before the time of when IT was able to handle such things, but the tender documents would come in 5 or 6 boxes, the reams of boxes that could take thousands of, you'd get those boxes that can take 5 packets of 500 sheet papers. So each box can contain up to 2,500 pages. The tender documents would come in 5 or 6 of those. I mean, now it's a bit more digital, perhaps, although I'm not entirely sure it's 100% more digital. But so
the big jobs are monstrous. They spend years. Crossrail was being drawn up in the early 2000s.
Yeah. So the time and the big contractors haven't got the time or the resources to put to that sort of bid. So if you of knowledge and say, look, I'm gonna take off the section for you that deals with the electrical installation or some of the electrical design that we have to review, you probably stand in good stead. Certainly with that contractor.
The problem with that is, and that's what a lot of contractors do. I've had a lot of times when I've had to go and mop up, where you would have a contractor. There'll be a project, and they've tendered out, say, a lift and escalator package, which the contractor would go to a lift and escalator company and say, "Give us a cost for 2 lifts, 2 escalators, job done." Put their mark up, easy peasy. But the M&E fit out, they would put a provisional sum or a tender together. They would then get squeezed on their tender costs, so their margins are absolutely minimal. But then the civils and the glazing and the cladding and the architectural finishes would impact the program of works, and this contractor would then lose money, and then I'd be brought in to mop up. And you just be like, it is so important, regardless, even if you're working on like a small mansion fit out where they do design work and stuff, it's so important to engage early on with any drawings that are produced, any architects, so that you can get your thoughts on how am I going to service this, and especially now, because if you look at like these mansions that are being developed in West London, never mind big office fit out, everything is smart. So you've now got fiber optics going around everywhere. You've got massive data cabling networks. You're having data centers. You're having smart controls, touch panels. You've got electrical building services now built into handrails. You've now got it built into glazing, where you can tap glazing now and it goes blackout. So it just puts an electrical charge in it, and it makes it like tints it. So you've got smart buildings, you've got this is the environmental efficiencies of buildings. You have to build stuff so it's sustainable, which is using smart technologies, grey water recycling, rainwater recycling, solar PV, measuring it, managing it, showing it. There's so much detail that you have to go from the concept. You have to have somebody with an electrical brain throughout the life of the project. The earlier the better. So if you're a contractor, my advice to you is yes, pick and choose your clients, but find the ones where you can offer them a service where you can engage early, even if it's only on like hourly rate or whatever, just to give them some advice and some thoughts as an independent service, and see if that helps. Because you may find if you offer that as a service, a design review or a design check, you may end up doing, I mean, I've done design reviews, you know this, Colin, I've done a design and the client have reviewed and put 200 comments and I've done 2,000 because I've gone, how do I build this? What's the detail? What height's my sockets at? Why am I even asking that question? You've been paid £1 million for a design and there was so many deficiencies in it. Or you'd get companies that would give you these cut and paste volumes of specifications that were, I remember one, I think the one we had for the station we worked on was, I think it was about 3,000 pages. And I think I was the only person that actually read every bit of it. Because when it came to snagging, I was going, but that's on page 97, that's on page 468. And nobody had read it. The little nuances that said like fuse spurs shall be engraved with whatever, they're not labeled, engraved. You know, key switches will plates will be engraved with what they do and as a function, because when you dyno label something, it will peel off in a workplace because people rub, and that's why they wanted it engraved. And all those little nuances that the contractor hadn't done, and then once they'd done it wrong, they realised it would cost them, so they would then say, "Well, I'm not doing it." And I found that to be a big problem. But just kind of taking, if you had some advice for an electrical contractor as a civils man, what advice would you give to electrical contractors out there in general?
I suppose, I mean, generally, I suppose I would say, obviously, just bear in mind that, you know, those guys are going to have their problems, their design issues to get over, their challenges with the build. So, you know, take those on board, listen, understand, and then at the same time, you know, communicate your own in a professional, sound manner, so that a joined up solution can be sought. You know, we all want to get the job built and go home at the end of the day. Nobody wakes up in the morning, at least as far as I'm concerned, and goes to site with the intention of saying, "Oh, I'm gonna," or that I, per the electrical contractor, I'm going to make sure the fire alarm system doesn't go in. You know,
do you know what? There are people out there that have done that.
Are some, yeah.
If you remember, we had to get security because people were sabotaging the electrical installations as they were going on.
Yes, well, we were, and I think, and correct me if this is out of order, but I think that was a slightly different motive there, in that because we were near to the end of the job, and like you say, we had to have the security patrolling, which was something I never quite got on my head around, but that's maybe for another podcast, given the project manager that instigated that. But my understanding was that that particular piece of sabotage had been undertaken with the motive of prolonging the job, because it was coming to an end. Guys were starting to get laid off.
It was known in the electrical trade as trying to spank the arse out of the job. And the electrical contractor had actually declared very early on that this was their last ever project in the UK, and that they were effectively going bankrupt or pulling out of the UK. So every single person on this job had effectively been told, when this job finishes, your job's at an end. And the job was finishing in, I think it was October. I think it was scheduled for November, but we opened in October. So they were all trying to get a Christmas dinner out of it, which is understandable, but it had to be open, period.
In the civils world, we make enough balls ups our own that we don't need sabotage. We can drag the job out just by doing our usual performance of bringing steel to site that just doesn't fit, or whatever it might be,
or a transformer that won't fit in the hole that's been made. All of the thing is I find as well, the one thing I do, I always try and get to site as much as I can, is the banter you have, and this is the thing as well, the site managers, the agents. One thing I realized going into the civil engineering fraternity is not only do they have the morale of lots and lots of men and to be mindful of, but some of that labor is non-skilled, some of it is skilled. But generally it's very labor intense. Go dig, go fetch, go carry. So instructions must be really clear. So the people in charge of setting out. They are juggling a lot. So as an electrical contractor, if you're going in, my advice is don't become part of the problem. Come with parts of solutions, and communicate that very clearly. And that's where I think you can build some really good. You won't be everybody's cup of tea. Some people are, and it's fair to say, Colin, there are people in the infrastructure industry who are bullies, who couldn't give a damn if you were put under a bus, who don't give a toss, who just want stuff thrown in. They don't care about the quality. They don't care about the paperwork. They just want to get it in, get it done, and move on, and just claim all the credit. There are some horrible people in the infrastructure industry, but there's also decent ones.
No, I completely agree with that. I've unfortunately seen that, and I think we both have, both together and separately. I was just going to add that, you guys, the electrical contractors, have got ideas. You're living and breathing this, so the latest developments, the latest ingenuities, the latest products. Jobs are won on ideas. Sometimes jobs are won on ideas and finished on ideas. So don't be frightened to bring those to the table, no matter how late in the build it is. But, I mean, Bank Station was won because the successful contractor came up with an idea to get people flowing through that station. They would build it for less. They didn't say they'd build it any quicker. They had an idea of how to get people through that station. They understood their client, what their client wants ultimately. I mean, obviously they want to have a project delivered on time, to budget, 0 accidents, all those good stuff that we all kind of work to. But thinking beyond that, when you've handed over the O&M manuals, given them the keys, finished the job effectively, what do they want then? They want to get people through that station as quick as possible, but at the same time having a great experience. And they came up with some ideas that helped that and were successful.
Thank you very much. I was on that project team for a very short period of time. I was brought in to help get the Transport Works Act through, and part of that work was we were trying to look at the best value for the job, and one of the things I came up with was moving the high voltage transformer for the central line upstairs so that we could get the tunneling done quicker. And I had to then build, this is no word of a lie, I had to build a transformer exact replica size out of plywood. I then had to bring it into the station, into the area I wanted to put it in, document it, and write a report saying it can be physically done, to assure the client that it was worth investing in that. The client then signed off on the idea, which then shortened the length of the project by 18 months and saved us a load of money. And that was an idea that just popped literally, I think it was my second week there. But and that's with anyone. You don't have not degree, have to care enough to understand and say to yourself, how would I do that? How would I do that? And that's really important. Now, we'll finish this up with the conversation that's hopefully not going to get me and you sacked from our jobs and our careers. Anyone who knows us is listening. So the infrastructure industry is not in the best of state. It causes a lot of mental health problems. I think that's fair to say. It burns people out. I think that's fair to say. What do you see? And I have in my own, and I'm going to say this out loud, I think one of the major reasons in commercial and industrial infrastructure contracting things go wrong is because of the way things are procured. So procurement is when you go out and buy something. You buy an electrical contractor's services for a project, or you procure an entire project. So I may want an office block built. So how do I procure it? Do I procure the contractor, i.e. Colin and Co., to design and build it? Or do I go get someone to design it and then Colin to go and build it? And there are various forms of contract you can engage with. And generally it gets very administrative, very time consuming heavy as far as management and everything else. And some of the contracts get so political and so awkward. The man with the spanner and the screwdriver or the shovel doing the work gets forgotten about. And so all that stress and pressure goes on him. And I've been on jobs where I've been told, right, you've got to go in, you've got to gut a room and you've got to fit it out. Fine, no problem at all. How long do you think it will take? And I'm thinking, well, okay, let me have a look at the drawings. Oh, there's no drawings. Well, where is it? So I've been told, and I go and have a look at it and I'm like, but only I can fit in this room. So it's one man. So it's one man and it's going to take him a couple of days to get the room well, a day to suss it out, 2 days to get it ripped out, and let's say another 3 days to get it all fitted out, and another day for commissioning. And you get told, no, you've got to get it done in 2 days. Well, how? Put more labour on it. Well, how? They won't fit in the room. Don't care. And then the wall of I don't care goes up. And you're like, but you're now physically talking X-Files. You're talking science fiction, fantasy. And I have found in my career, just being the person that says that won't work, stop, you're demented, has done me well. It's caused a bit of conflict, but it's never been in a horrible way. But it's let's just do the job properly and do it once. And infrastructure, I've kind of looked at the root cause of why this happens, and it seems to be procurement. We procure things weirdly and strangely, and things don't stitch together. If we look at Crossrail as a perfect example, because it's publicly documented, Crossrail procured the designs in the late 90s, early 2000s. They spent nearly a decade doing the designs. Fast forward to 2009, I think, I was on a Crossrail job where very detailed. And when it came to the electrical, it just had a bubble that said transformer for tunnel boring. That's it. I had to figure out all of the design myself and build the job and hit the deadline. Was that procured potentially? Well, what's your views on how electrical works are procured in general?
I mean, I'm certainly inclined to agree, and I think there's another issue in that, to a certain extent, I think too much is procured as well, and this creates further interfaces that you wouldn't necessarily you could do without further disjointing. I mean, what I've found when I've been involved in the procurement is that you're looking for that one-stop shop if you can find it, and then that rarely exists. So, a big civils contractor will maybe procure upwards of 4 or 5 subcontractors to deliver what will ultimately be the entire electrical, mechanical, public health, HVAC sort of scope, and then try to manage that interface. And that's where problems will lie, because they won't have the expertise to manage that interface. And rightly regarding themselves, they've got to be able to deliver what they want to deliver and turn a profit at the end of the day. So that fragmented procurement can be an issue. If we can get either companies talking to each other better, or a bit more of a one-stop shop to manage everything. I know we've attempted that before.
Well, the trouble is the one-stop shop led to the brown paper bag world of I'll look after you, you look after me, all that rubbish. That to me, I've had it. I'm not going to lie. In my career, where people have literally said, "There's your Christmas drink," and I've just gone totally mental, and that company have not. Well, they've not been around much longer. But it does still happen. The foolish and the few still do it. I think it's fair to say. Not me, nothing around me. I won't tolerate any of that. But it is quite scary that, and this is the one thing I see a lot of, the term "I must have value." You must demonstrate value. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at value. I know I can go and get a building built with, let's say, Colin and Co. Purely hypothetical, and I know you. I know the caliber of you, your staff, the quality of your work, the admin, the paperwork, everything. I know I'm comfortable with you. I've worked with you before. But now I have to demonstrate best value, so I've got to get 3 quotes. So I then have to spend a massive amount of my time going to 2 other contractors, putting all these documents out, getting them in, reviewing them, scoring them, assessing them, interviewing them. Now that could take me another 3 months on my time. Yeah. Now that 3 months of my time, you may tender to work, let's say purely hypothetical, £1 million, and everybody else may come in at, say, 900 grand, 1 million and 1.1. So I turn around and say, well, I'm going to give it to Colin and Co. anyway for £1 million because they were better anyway. Or if I go with a 900 grand one, have I saved 100 grand, or have I wasted 100 grand on me and my team in 3 months delays and salaries? So I'm not actually saving any money. I've just gone with the cheapest, who are then going to look to squeeze that further under the guise of value. Anything I have a document, they will turn around and say, well, I didn't price for that. That's an extra.
When we were studying procurement in our various guises, one piece of advice was, I mean, it's a bit difficult if you only go to 3, but it is such hard work putting together a package. 3 is fairly
Three's
understandable.
a minimum, isn't it? It's normally
Yeah, 3,
5 now.
3 is a minimum. 5 is ideal. Although I'll tell you one little story about how that didn't work briefly. But we've always told throw away the most expensive and the most cheapest, and then look at what's left, because there's something wrong with them. But yeah, but just touching on one of your points with the effort, of course, when I worked in that field, if we wanted 3 quotes back, we'd have to send out 6 packages. And there's so much work to put together, because there'll be companies, and this is probably another piece of advice. If you say you're gonna, I know it's difficult with a client, you don't want to upset them, and you want to be able to keep them, sweet for future work and everything else. But believe me, certainly as far as I'm concerned, there will be no black mark put against you if you, for whatever reason, don't tender a particular package. If you're too busy, or you haven't got that skill set, or it's geographically it doesn't suit you, whatever the reason, if you don't want to tender a particular package, say so, because there's so much work to put together to send it out and not get anything back, or get a 1-page letter back saying we can't kind of price this for XYZ is demoralizing. So if you are approached by a bid team with an inquiry to price a particular package, just be upfront about what you can do and how you can do it.
Just on that, Colin, if for those who are listening, by the way, you're probably, if you're wondering what goes in a tender return. So basically, a tender document is where the client will say, here's a load of surveys, here's a load of reports, here's some buried services reports, here's some trial holes I've done, here's some hand trace and tag reports, here's what I want you to build from an architectural, so the visualization of it.
That could be 100 drawings.
And also here's the sequence of what my architect thinks it can be done. You're then asked to put a tender together with a proposal. And that's what it is. It's a proposal. It's we, Joe Bloggs and Co, understand and receipt all the drawings, and you reference every drawing you've received, period. Because the last thing you want to do is send a tender in, and then the client comes back to you the day after and says, you've missed 500 drawings, or you've missed all of this. So you have to reconfirm back to them what you've received, and then say, right, so we see this as program, it can be done in 18 months, but these are the options you've got. This is how we're going to physically do it. The civils will be done by this with our supply chain. We will do it like this with 2-man teams or whatever. And you literally just narrate as if I was telling you a story of how I built a job. You narrate that, and you just make sure that it has a systems approach. It means you don't just go, I'm going to dig a hole and fill it with concrete, put some steel and glass in, bosh, you'll get what you want. A systems approach is, when I dig the hole, I'm going to look to put foundation earthing in. Because the electrical guys will need that. When I do the concrete pour, it will have the structural strength to carry a transformer, because we believe, worst case scenario, you're going to need some transformers on the 10th floor, or do you know what I mean? So you think about everything as a joint up, demonstrate your competency to the client. Now, as a client, I use a scoring of 60-40. So 60% is technical and compliance of bid, and 40 is cost. And I've been able to do that in my last 2 roles now, because if someone has the competency and the ability to understand the role and the technical people, they should be able to win the job on that, the quality side of it, rather than just, because if you do 50% cost, whoever comes in cheap is going to win it. Because the commercial people just go, he gets 50%. Well, all the rest of them only add up to about 40. No, he gets it. And it's an argument. If you genuinely get people who understand it, they'll win it. One other bit of advice in this podcast as well is the terms, the roles. Within the electrical world, outside of domestic, you have in the commercial industrial, you'll have a site foreman, which we all know because that's pretty generic. But from a site foreman, you'll then get a site engineer, who's the chap who sits above him, who maybe look after the drawings, do the day-to-day planning, sits in an office. You'll then have project engineers on jobs, senior project engineers. They then report to project managers. Within the civil engineering fraternity, you'll have site foreman, finishing foreman, assistant construction manager, sub-agent, agents, and the agents are equivalents of project managers, so are the sub-agents. They look after packages. You'll then have a project manager. So there are, if you put the 2 levels together, they're not, you've got loads and loads of roles for civils and structures and not many for M&E. And it's the only successes I can find in infrastructure is when the two realize that they're intertwined. Not this, oh, because there's more, and it's always been this way. Civils will always lead projects because without the civils, nothing appears. It's quantities, the large quantities of concrete and steel, you have nothing to fix to. So they always will do it. The mistake is when the civil guys get to the end of the job and they go, well, the M&E can just be whip cracked into finishing.
Yeah.
That's where the companies go bankrupt. That's where the bad reputations, that's where the stress happens. And hopefully you can use your intuition to avoid that. But my advice for electricians and contractors is learn about procurement, learn about the different forms of contract, don't be afraid to come up with your own terms and conditions. Don't be afraid to know your own competency limits and be honest and open with them. And don't be afraid to chip in, even if it is a difficult conversation with the civil engineering world or the infrastructure world, the construction world, and stay away from office fit out. That's my personal one. Nightmare. Okay. Do you have any more advice, words of wisdom, or thoughts?
Just a couple of bits to
go for it,
to touch on with the procurement, and then I'll sort of round off with a couple of bits. Obviously, we're in a very digital age. Everything's digital. Everything's virtual, and we moving into that more and more. And that made me think of two things. Firstly, don't you get the document Google Drive or on a CD-ROM or whatever it might be, that any less work has gone into it just because it isn't churned out of a printer at the end and couriered over to your office doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't been an absolute ball ache to create and produce and value every piece. Like Paul says, the surveys, the drawings, the reports, everything, to spend as much time as you can picking through them. Just briefly on that weighting, the weighting of the scores. I've actually worked on bids on the contractor side, the client side, where the weighting on the cost has been as little as 10%. Things like health and safety performance and innovation, experience in that kind of work. They've held heavier weighting. So don't be afraid to actually, put the job at what it costs. Don't think you're going to be, penalised for that. You might be on mute, Paul. I can't hear you.
Sorry, that's a good point, because health and safety now on sites can cost and penalise contractors massively. So
we've asked. I've produced either pre-qualification questionnaires or questionnaires within a bid that will ask for the last 3 to 5 years of your health and safety records. Things like that. So that's an important aspect as well. Just wanted to mention that. And I suppose, I'm probably in danger of repeating ideas, that innovation, speak up when you think you need to, because you probably are, although it may not seem apparent, the expert in that room, whether it be a mid-bid meeting, it might be the first meeting that you've had after being successful, it might be a meeting where you're just being brought on to the build and it's halfway through, whatever it may be, you're probably, without realising it at first, or it should quickly become apparent, you're the expert in the room, so don't be frightened to say what you feel.
I think it's fair to say a project's only as strong as its weakest link. And I'm very fortunate. I learned loads from the civil engineering world. It opened up my mind from just pipes and wires to there's a lot more work that goes into just that pouring of concrete and all the rest of it. So I'm gonna cut this off, but I'm gonna leave you one last question. What do you look for in an electrical contractor? If let's say tomorrow at work somebody says, right, Colin, I have got £50 million worth of electrical works needs to be done. Manage it. What would you go out and look for? How would you start?
I think it would be a case of looking for a company with a good track record, in delivering complex, large projects. A company that can be honest about their workforce, honest about their current capabilities. don't come and tell me you can deliver the whole world in 3 months when even I know that's not that's not possible. You know, be honest and be open. Because there is always the risk. You have to remember there are two sides to this coin. So as a contractor, I will be looking for a electrical contractor to deliver me those sorts of things. And this is sort of going back briefly to your procurement options, Paul. The client may have procured the design separately. It may not have been design and build like you referred to. It may have been procured separately. Typically, that's going to be one of the large design and consultancy houses who do have some in-house expertise, but there's always the possibility that they fed the client a bit of a yarn because they have a design vision or an architectural statement they want to make, and that might override genuinely usable advice about how best to deliver that project. So again, don't be frightened to call in to question my information even. I might have been handed a design, and if when you're doing your bid, putting together your procurement package, if you think something doesn't work, tell me, because I'd rather know that as soon as than have something built and have to take it down, or worse still, delay the project.
Okay, all right. I think that's about it for me. If it was me doing it, first thing I'd look for, again, yes, attitude, honesty, workforce. Do they hold any professional accreditations? And I don't mean NIC registered. They can be, but as a client, that doesn't really. The badges the supply chain hold don't really mean that much, to be honest with you, because generally the clients will ask for what they ask for. It's more about their attitude and can I work with them and can they deliver? That's what construction infrastructure. If you go into the infrastructure industry or construction in general, you've got to have a I will deliver mindset, and you've got to have a collaborative mindset. You've got to have a I can de-risk the client mindset, and not just a lash it and crash it in and silo thinking. If you go in with a silo mentality, you're going to fail.
Think about repeat order business. You want to work with this contractor again and again and again. Don't think of it as a one-off job.
Or you may think of it a one-off job if the client's a scumbag.
Well, obviously is a possibility.
We know that misery. We have had that misery as well. We've had the misery of clients interfering constantly in us trying to build stuff, but that's another podcast maybe for another year. Right, Colin, thank you very much for your time, sir. We'll end it there. This has been a little different one for those who normally listen to us, because we really are covering quite a diverse range of subjects in this series. So that's really it. Thank you very much, everyone. It's nearly Christmas time, so batten down the hatches. Colin, thank you very much for your time, good sir. And as per usual, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. And until the next one, take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.